Returned from a long time in the watery grave of obsolescence, Hydroid has been reworked and is stronger than ever. Whether you're looking for an intense elemental damage boost, ability-free armor stripping, or one of the highest armor values in the game, Hydroid may have something for you. I'm Nick Engineer, let's solve a practical problem. Hydroid has had a complete glow up with the changes made to him this year, enabling a much more aggressive and effective playstyle, allowing you to really get a lot from him. You can also get more from this channel by becoming a supporter on Patreon for even more behind the scenes. The link for that is in the video description. Let's start with Hydroid's passive. While previously it was a 50% chance to spawn a single tentacle on doing a ground slam, now Hydroid curses every enemy he touches. If Hydroid damages an enemy himself, such as with an ability or weapon, the enemy is cursed and a marker appears above their head. This curse makes corrosive procs more effective on the enemy, with a single corrosive proc removing 50% of their armor instead of 26%, and a full stack of 10 corrosive effects removing 100% of their armor while in effect. With this passive alone, you can fully armor strip enemies using any corrosive status based weapon, handily tearing apart armored enemies at higher levels. This does have a weakness versus boss type enemies however, as any status limit will limit the maximum effect, while status immunity completely nullifies this passive. The rest of Hydroid's kit leans into this corrosive passive by having corrosive involved every step of the way. His one is still Tempest Barrage, calling down a rain of now corrosive projectiles to damage, sunder and stagger enemies. This can quickly armor strip enemies in the area and no longer has a charge mechanic, deploying at full power with a tap cast. His 2 is still Tidal Surge, propelling Hydroid forwards and bringing enemies along for the ride. Just like with Tempest Barrage, Tidal Surge has been moved to using corrosive damage. It also has gained some turning control, groups enemies up more helpfully, and cleanses status from Hydroid innately without need of an augment. His 3 is a brand new ability, Plunder. This ability will grant Hydroid an armor bonus and corrosive damage bonus based on the number of stacks he can acquire up to a maximum. Hydroid gains a bonus for each enemy in range and an additional bonus for each corrosive proc on each enemy in range. The maximum effect is capped, though the cap also scales with strength to some very generous values. It also removes all corrosive procs from nearby enemies, turning the temporary armor reduction they were suffering into a permanent one. Despite the current description, Hydroid doesn't steal armor from enemies. The bonus to armor and corrosive damage just happens at the same time as making the corrosive effects permanent. Hydroid can still use Plunder on enemies with no procs and no armor, yet still gain maximum buffs if enough enemies are around him. Finally, Hydroid's 4th is Tentacle Swarm, summoning a deep sea beast and, as you might expect, a swarm of tentacles to grab enemies. Grabbed enemies are incapacitated and struck every second for corrosive damage and status. The swarm should grab a new enemy in the zone if the one it is holding perishes. The whole kit is set up in a way to work with itself. Using Hydroid's 1 and 4 will apply corrosive procs to all enemies in an area, while staggering or incapacitating them to prevent them attacking Hydroid. With the procs applied, Hydroid can consume those to grant himself a large boost to armor and corrosive damage, not only killing enemies more quickly, but also ramping up the chance of applying corrosive status with his weapons. Tidal Surge is a bit of an odd one out in the kit in my experience. Though it has gained some control with the rework, it's still a single dash forwards ragdolling enemies that could otherwise be controlled by his 1 and 4. Even with this status cleansing, Tidal Surge is mostly just rolling guard at home. This makes it my go-to helmet slot. It might be a bit hard at first to grasp just how effective Plunder is. Unmodded, it provides a maximum armor boost of 750, effectively allowing for a 259% increase in Hydroid's armor. For comparison, unmodded Chroma offers a 145% armor bonus from Cold Elemental Ward, or 350% from Vex armor, while both Wukong's Defy and Atlas's passive grant up to 1500 armor flat. This does mean that while Hydroid can get a lot of armor, it's not the absolute highest in the game and it requires significant strength to outscale other Warframes. However, this bonus is applied near instantly and comes along with an even stronger corrosive damage bonus. Most Warframes that can add an elemental bonus start at 100% with 100% strength, with some going even lower. Hydroid on the other hand has 200% cap at 100% strength, granting up to twice the elemental bonus. You're effectively getting yourself nearly twice the benefit of Elemental Ward, twice the bonus of Venom Dose, and you have the added bonus of turning existing corrosive procs into permanent armor strip. That last bit doesn't really matter as much, as any procced enemies should be dying in the next 2 seconds to you anyway. The biggest downside to Plunder is the requirement to have enough enemies and/or corrosive effects active in range on cast. If you don't, you may receive a pitifully low bonus. Worse still, recasting ability overrides any existing bonus, potentially setting you back if you use it at the wrong time. At time recording, there is also a Plunder bug where even if you should appear to meet the criteria for a high boost from Plunder, it can sometimes just give you a very low bonus, effectively wasting your cast and putting you in danger. Pay attention to the value you get in case this bug tries to kill you. When we consider Hydroid's whole setup, he's got plenty of crowd control, defense, and offense. What he lacks are effective mobility or stealth tools, but thankfully most of Warframe doesn't have a demand for more than the universal options for mobility and stealth. In terms of building him then, I've put together a few approaches. If you're still pretty new and can't afford much upgrading for Hydroid, grab yourself a basic build like this using redirection and fast deflection. Despite Hydroid being able to generate thousands of armor, that's no use if you lack the mods or options to both create that armor and then heal sufficiently to make use of it. Instead, this relies on his innately high shields to give you solid star chart defense to pair with your crowd control, while using duration, range, and efficiency to maintain his abilities. This approach is especially suited for players who struggle with energy. You'll want to upgrade away from that build by even low tier steel path however, and where you go from there depends on if Hydroid is heading into a low or high enemy density mission. For whatever mission type he's used for, I've applied a couple Azure Archon shards for energy capacity to Hydroid, as I feel he doesn't need the full benefit of flow, let alone prime flow, but a little bit more energy capacity can make the difference in a pinch. For low enemy density missions, we have this setup. Defensively, we're using adaptation with shields to survive incoming damage long enough to trigger Arcane Aegis. When that activates, the next 12 seconds you're basically immortal against anything that isn't toxin damage. Once again, Hydroid's innately high shield capacity is what gives him the durability to attempt that. I'm using Primed Vigor here as a twofold bonus to shields and health. While plus 25% more shields will be, well, more shields, some damage sources will still one-shot your shields and put you onto your shield gate. This is where the health from Prime Vigor comes in, to give an increased buffer in connection with adaptation and plunder. With those extra hit points, you'll usually have enough time to set up crowd control or get to cover to allow your shields to begin recharging. Fast deflection is also cutting down that shield recharge time and delay to further support this. The whole reason for going with such a setup is because it's independent of abilities. Whether you lack a reliable energy source or don't have enough enemies in enough clusters to get good value out of plunder, this provides an always-on, self-regenerating defense. If you don't have Prime Vigor, I would suggest swapping to Redirection rather than dropping down to Normal Vigor. Normal Vigor will only provide plus 50% to each of health and shields, at which point you might as well take the 100% in shields as your primary tank anyway. The rest of this setup is focused on a neutral range, increased strength, and plenty of duration to keep your abilities up as long as possible. Plunder especially benefits from this for when you manage to secure a good high cast of it. If you don't have any energy issues, swap out Streamline for your preference of more duration with Augur Message or Constitution, more range with Augur Reach, or more shield recharge with Vigilante Vigor by applying a different polarity. Don't worry, despite their names, both Primed and Vigilante Vigor can be equipped simultaneously. If you're in a higher enemy density mission where full plunder can be relied upon, that's where we can switch over to this setup. Our defense now is fully into health tanking alongside any necessary crowd control casting. However, rather than spending a mod slot on Vitality or one of its variants, this is using Arcane Blessing to generate the maximum health from health orbs. This works best with an appropriate companion setup, which I'll cover in a moment. With more enemies comes more reliable orbs to power our setup, allowing us to helmet in, nourish, and drop our efficiency in the bin. Right out the gate, we have nearly 300% strength, rising yet further with kills in the enemy-rich environment to a maximum of 358% ability strength. This means a normal energy orb will grant up to 114 energy, we get up to 268.5% viral damage bonus to our weapons, up to 716% corrosive damage bonus to weapons and abilities, up to 2685 armor bonus for a damage reduction of just over 90%, all while maintaining a neutral range and close to 200% duration. Even Energy Siphon at this point, usually an aura that's more for filling a slot than anything else, would now be granting over 2.7 energy per second. This is more than enough to maintain Nourish's 1.6 energy per second effective cost. You may consider using Rousing Plunder instead of Transient Fortitude. This will grant you more duration at nearly no loss to the max effect of Plunder, as well as a small healing effect on cast for you and your nearby allies. It however doesn't grant additional strength to any other ability, reducing the value it provides. I would advise against trying to use Rousing Plunder for actual healing, as it's both the most expensive ability in this kit, and recasting it will remove the existing bonus, possibly replacing it with a much lower one. Instead, you should seek sufficient healing from health orbs, lifesteal weapons, or operator abilities and arcanes. For either of the low or high enemy density setups, you can consider swapping out a strength mod in favour of Viral Tempest to add viral procs to your Tempest Barrage. For the low density setup, this could be very effective to support taking down tougher enemies. However, for the high density setup, you should have plenty of viral effects from Nourish already, which will reduce the value here. In terms of a companion, my choice for this Hydroid is the Panzer Vulperfiler. Yes, I know, after all the changes to companions I've still ended up mentioning Panzer, but it's really effective here. The combination of Reinforced Bond for additional fire rate, Tenacious Bond for additional critical damage, and Synth Deconstruct for additional health orbs all boost areas that Hydroid is not boosting. Reinforced Bond requires calculated redirection for us to hit the shield requirement, Tenacious Bond requires Bite for the critical requirement, and Synth Deconstruct is supported heavily by the Viral Quills and Panzer Devolution precepts for getting those assists in. Vulperfilers in their larval state will still grant you the benefits of the bond mods, giving us the greatest uptime possible for those. The remaining mod slots go to the ever useful Primed Animal Instinct and Fetch, as well as Medi Pet Kit to provide healing to the companion over time and reduce how often it reverts to larval form. If you're in the circuit, you can use the high density setup to last longer than the low density, but you will need to have either a non-companion way of producing health orbs, or more reliably, just drop Transient Fortitude for Umbral Vitality. That should give you enough maximum health to safely build up the Arcane Blessing stacks. Should you not want to use a Synth Deconstruct companion outside of the circuit, or just not trust yourself to stay alive whilst getting those early stacks, then this little change may be better for you too. For one final approach, we can look to Hydroid's Pilfering Swarm augment. Pilfering Swarm grants you a second loot roll from any enemies killed while it is holding them. It's a very simple augment, but worthwhile for farming purposes, either alongside or instead of a Necros in the squad, at least if you don't own or don't want to use Cora. As you'll want to kill the grabbed enemies, we don't want a high range setup lest we trap them out of easy reach. That said, you still need enough range to prevent enemies sitting outside of the grab range and shooting at you. You can fine tune the range with a high ranked narrow-minded or swapping Augur Message for stretch to suit the specific tile set you intend to farm. Most resource farming using Hydroid should be done on missions which are not a high threat to you, therefore I've not set this up with any defensive mods at all. If you do wish to rock some defense, use again Adaptation instead of Augur Secrets, then Arcane Blessing for max health from orb pickups. The focus otherwise is just on duration to keep the tentacles running, and you should be shooting the enemies that get grabbed to secure your double loot rolls. Efficiency and strength can be left neutral, but we're not dumping strength so as to still get a notable damage boost from Plunder. No subsume is needed, leaving you free to put in anything of your choice over Tidal Surge, such as Silence for protection against heavy unit abilities. Any slot left open in these builds, be it Exodus or Arcane, those are entirely flex and at your discretion. With Hydroid already providing tank and elemental damage, you can look to fire rate or critical boost in Arcanes, or look to status defense, such as Arcane Nullifier if you wish to be more protected against energy draining magnetic procs. Between all these setups, you've got options for shield tanking, health tanking, looting, and being circuit viable with this reworked Warframe. Hydroid is actually a force to be reckoned with now. So grab your favourite high damage and status weapon, sunder enemies with a curse from the deep, and get the most out of this incredible rework. As we wrap this up, I just want to say thank you to everyone who supports this channel. Whether here, on Twitch, or Patreon, I massively appreciate it. That's all for now though, so as always, summon swarms, sunder foes, and fight well, Tenno.